Hey, it's Joe Glines by Automator, and this is a little extract from a hero call where Isaias found that in a function it was returning different things at different times, and he walks through, does a really great job teaching everyone of why that's a bad thing and kind of how to plan around it. So enjoy this. Remember, the hero program is a great program. We meet 3 times a week, and we put the videos up on YouTube. They're just unlisted. We have over 400 hours now, and you also get 25% off of all of our courses and scripts and anything else. So enjoy this video. Please like it if you learned something. It really helps us out. Have a great day. Cheers.
I'm going to call it, and I'm going to call it exactly the same way as you did, or how the script did. F1 will do this. Okay. And what I want to test in here is, what do I get? What is my result when I have multiple files selected? All right. So that's it. That's how I would test it. I would copy the function, make a function call, put it in the variable, and let's see. I'm expecting it to be a string. All right. So when I stop here, I'm going to place a stop here. I'm expecting that to be a string. This is a test file. Okay. I'm going to run the script. All right. Hold on. What? No, that's not it.
Yeah, it's not. This one can't take more than one file, FYI. So,
okay. Exit app. I just want to run this one script. Explorer tab doesn't have any information. Why? Huh. Oh, okay. So he tied it up with something from the other script. Okay. So somewhere. Oh, there it is. I need this other function, by the way.
And it assumes you have a hotkey to trigger it.
Well, yeah,
Control T.
Well, I have F1 in here. It's the hotkey. So let's see. All right. So you're gonna run it, right? So it's running now. I'm gonna go to Explorer, select multiple files.
No, you can't.
Well, that's the point. That's what I'm trying to figure out. What is happening? So because that's what he tried. And my question here would be is, what happens when I do that? So right now, I'm supposedly getting a string of multiple files, which I am. Now, the tool itself, when we look at the actual tool, what we do is that we try to string split that into
Shouldn't be
with new lines and grab the first one.
Yeah, well,
right. So we grab the first one out of it. Right, exactly. But what happened was we somehow got an array in here. And I'm kind of trying to determine, how did we get an array right there? And I don't see that happening, because when I just tested it and I retrieved multiple files, it is still a string. Let's say that the return type is not a string. Does it return an array then, if it is not a string? No, that's still a string. So I don't have to do. Well, what other return types are there? Okay, so if it is not string, which it is by default, there we go. So the to return is an array here. That means that the return type was set to blank. That's what happened. And if I do that, I should get an array, which I do. You see, now I get an array. So somehow it was called with the blank parameter or something else. It could be anything else, like test. That would still return an array for you. So basically, as you can see, the only way how I can get an array in here is if you messed up with that parameter there, either misspelled it or moved it a blank or put something that it was invalid. At that point, I am going to get an array. And if I get an array, then the string split is going to fail later, because I got something that I was not expecting. If you do not call it with that, so if you just call it like this, the default one, okay? The default one should return a string by default, which is totally fine. So, no, sorry, let me reload this. Oh, you know what? Oh, that's another one. I know how it happens. I got it. The Explorer selection couldn't get whatever it needed. So at that point, what happened was it was empty. That's annoying. And when it is empty, it returns an array because it just returns this thing. What? Okay. So the Explorer get selection, it is breaking one of the rules that is a computer rule. It's not like everybody follows it, but I think is a good rule of thumb. Your function should return only one type of things, all right? This function is returning two different types. Here, it is creating an array. So here, it returns an array. Okay, so that's what it does. This is an array, it returns an array. But here, it returns a string. And because of that, now it makes this function completely unreliable, which is what happened to you. Because what happened was, everything is right. So this function was a string, right?
Right.
It actually tried to return this. So it returned an array. It didn't get something. So it probably didn't have a file. It didn't have anything, right? And because it had nothing, it returned an array. But the problem is, if you don't have an array, if you return an array, then the assumption that we're having in calling and transcribe right here is false. Right here, we think we will always get a string. That's the assumption, because we told it, hey, give me a string. But there are situations in which it doesn't return a string, like this one, for example, in which it returns an array. So here, what we should do is have an if statement, if return type equals string, right? Then we have to return blank. And if it doesn't, else it returns the blank array that we created up here, okay? And I have to keep checking on other spots of this thing to verify, hey, am I returning the right thing? I guess that's what was happening. It was probably that you hit the hotkey and the Explorer window was not the active window at that moment, and it stopped. And instead of returning the string, it actually returned an array. And that then messed up with what our expectations were. Here, the other change that I would do is say, hey, you know what? If selected files is a string, all right, and I'm going to negate that. If it is not a string, something went wrong, and I would either throw or return an error, whatever it is. Invalid selected files is not a string. So expected select file to be a string. Invalid type for selected files, right? Expected a string, but got, and then I will say whatever I got here, which is selected files. All right. So that's what I would do. Two things. One of them, whenever you get a function call or whatever, try to check your assumptions. Okay, we know that we told it to return a string, but is it really a string? We don't know. That's what was happening. But the root cause of the problem was that this thing is returning two different types. So one of them is an array, one of them is a string, And that is the source of this type of errors. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
that's the reason why it's not a good idea to return different types.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard Isaias mention that to mostly Irfan, but saying, yeah, that's a big thing that causes a lot of errors.
Right.
And problematically, not you don't see it right then, usually, right?
Right.
It's working the way you think.
Connie just showed me his code, and I was like, everything looks correct here. And he's passing it to string, right? So he says string here. So everything is good. How is that returning an array? Now I have to figure out in which context I would get an array out of this function, which is not, well, in this case, it's an easy task because the function was very small. And I don't think this was a function that Irfan created. This is a function that was created from the forums or something, right?
Yeah.
But that's, again, it is I say this all the time because it is not common knowledge. It's not everybody because it's easy for us to think that way. Like, hey, well, this returns an array, but sometimes I want a string. So sometimes I return an array, sometimes I return a string. Hey, the rule is return one type. And if you really, really, really need to return different types, then you have to really, really make sure that you're returning the right thing every single time. Whenever you're returning stuff, make sure that you're doing the right thing.
Hey, Isaias, I noticed you used the word return type. That's not in the help docs though, except that it shows up as a parameter of a DLL call. Is that an AutoHotkey thing? Return type?
Well, let me explain it this way. So AutoHotkey, especially V1, didn't have different objects. It didn't have different types, right? For example, a string and a number in AutoHotkey were the same thing. With V2, we're getting closer to other languages in which you have at least some certain things. And in AutoHotkey, and this is a good question because it's kind of like a basics of programming at this point. You have things like this, which are numbers. You have things like this, which are floating points or decimal places. You know, whenever you have decimal places, we call it floating points or floats or doubles, is what usually you would see them called as. These are integers. And these two things, of course, are numbers. All right? All of that is numbers. But then you have strings, right? So then you have strings, which are things like this and things like this, right? Those are strings. And then you have your objects. So then you have objects that go into the arrays, right? Maps and the actual object. Okay, so the simple object is what I call it, right? So now, in AutoHotkey, these are the only types that you will think about, all right? Now, when you create a function, the function will return certain things to whoever called the function. And that's where I say my function. So let's say that my function concatenates text. Concatenate, right? And you will pass multiple strings, all right? That's what that means. Well, it takes in a parameter. The type of the parameter will be a string, all right? So when I finish up, when I return something, what is the type that I'm going to return? I would guess a string as well, because I'm concatenating one to the other, right? So I would assume takes strings in, returns strings out. That makes sense for now, right? When I talk about that, that's where the return type comes in. I'm just referring to whatever variable I'm returning here. What is it? Is it a number? Is it a string? Is it an array? Is it an object? Is it a map? That's what I'm referring to as the return type. In AutoHotkey, you didn't have to think about those things before, right? That's the reason why you only see it on the DLL call. Because in other languages like C++, C#, Java, and many others, you do have typed things, and then you do have to make sure that you know what the return type of that function is. In AutoHotkey, we don't think about that. We never thought about that. But I'm always pushing for, hey, if you're creating your own function, just make sure that whenever you return something, it's of the same thing that you returned prior to that. Unless you have a very good compelling reason to not do that, I would definitely go with one type. If you return an array, okay, let's say that you return an array. Then at that point in your function, you can say, hey, if the string parameter is empty, return nothing. Yes, but don't return blank because that's a string, all right? And you have been returning arrays for everything else. Let's return a blank array. You can return that. You can return a blank array because later on you will return. Okay, so if I have, and in this case, I'm just making what is called a variadic function, which means it takes as many parameters as I want with some sort of limit, by the way. But this is an array. This is what it is. So if there is no length, okay, so if there's no length, I return an empty array. But if I do have a length, then for string, so st in str, then I'm going to have my concatenate. So concat cc, I will say it was a blank array. Okay, so when things go wrong, I return a blank array. When things go right, then I'm going to build my array. So cc push st, and then I return cc. Now notice how cc is an array, and here when things go wrong, I also return an array. Why not just start with a blank array here and say, hey, if there is no thing, just return cc. And if there is something, just return cc. Notice that I'm returning always the same thing. It just so happens that sometimes it is empty and sometimes it has stuff in it. But it's the same thing that I'm returning. That's what I mean by returning the same type. This is an array. My function will always return an array. So here I could always say text, right? And I can always say message box text dot length. That should always work. So if I have one thing here, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. And by the way, well, there you go. So if I do this, let me see, is it length? Is it? Oh yeah, I just misspelled it. That's why. Here, it tells me that I got 3 things. Yeah, I have 3 things. If I don't put anything in it, it will say 0. You see how both cases it works just fine? If you just simply say, if there's no string, stop. And if there is something, put something in here, I just broke the code. Now when I try it, I'm going to get an error. And it is because this is not returning an array, but I'm expecting an array outside. Does that make sense? So hopefully that makes sense. When I talk about return types, it's just that if you have a function and your function has multiple return points, okay? And this is great because your function should check for errors. And if it checks for errors, you will have different reasons why it stops early, all right? So if you give me a string, but I was expecting an array, I have to stop. If you do this and you gave me a string that it is not valid, I should stop as well. There are multiple reasons why it should stop before doing the actual work. In that case, those stops should all return the same type of thing so that it is easier outside of the code to just figure it out. Oh, concatenate always returns a string. Concatenate always returns an array, so I don't have to think about it. I know that it's a string, an array, always. Oh, no, it actually returns a string. Then in that case, return blank here. Again, I usually just return the variable so that I don't have to deal with it. And in here, instead of pushing, because it's not a string, an array, I will just do this and have a space. And now you will see that when I return CC in here, I can just look at the text, concatenate. If there's nothing, I get nothing. If there is something, all right, now I get my full string concatenated with spaces. Does that make sense? But my code doesn't break. If I now go ahead and return here an array instead of a string, does it make sense to you? Like, does it make sense that if I have nothing, I will return an array? Does that make sense whenever we're expecting text outside? That doesn't make sense, right?
Right.
And I just went in a little bit of a rant, but now check this out. If I go ahead and remove that, yeah, I got an error. You see? So I went in a little bit of a rant here, but the problem is you will find a lot of code in the forums and a lot of people who just return 10 different types of things. So now outside of the function, you have to now be very careful how you use the function, because one time it returns one thing, another time returns another. Now you have to figure out what that is and when that happens. And that's what I mean by return types. Hopefully that makes sense, Stephen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
I run into a problem with ACC when if you don't get it does not always return an object.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It returns a blank string when it doesn't find the element.
That's
but
right.
Everything else is an object. Whenever you find the object, you get an object, right? So why would you have it a blank string? A blank string. Now it forces you to always check. Okay, if I found it, great. If I didn't find it, is it a string or is it an object? See? So you're feeling my pain.
So I put in my code a little function that checks to see if it was an object, and then if it wasn't,
right,
post an error.
But that's the point. You were forced to do that because the library didn't handle it in the correct way. Oh, well, in the correct way, in my opinion, because again, all of what I'm saying is just my opinion, okay? But you see the problem. I'm not making it up.
Right.